Woo woo, welcome to Bible Theory, homie.
Taking the church to the streets, homie.
It's quite a shift to talk about San Francisco and then, China. I did do a show on with an author who wrote a book on The Walking Dead in China. She's like a reporter and,
Okay.
so I'll go ahead and link that below. How was it like to be in China, to be in the far western parts and the culture? You got the different elements of government and you got all kinds of different, vibes.
Yeah.
So just walk us through that. What was that like?
I mean, it was disorienting at times, very challenging, rewarding at the same time. The church in China has grown dramatically over the last 50 to 100 years. I mean, when Hudson Taylor was a missionary in China, there was basically no Christians in China.
Right.
Today, there's some estimates that there might be even 100 million Christians in China. So you have the Han, and if you think about it in terms of like people groups, the majority of Chinese people are part of what's called the Han people groups. When you think of Chinese, you tend to think of Han Chinese people. And that's where the majority of the Christian growth has been within that people group. But you also have these minority peoples all over around China. Some of them are very famous, like everyone has heard of Tibetans, everyone's heard of Mongols. There's actually more Mongols living in China than there are living in Mongolia, the country. You have little tribal peoples in the mountains. But some of these people groups, have millions and millions of people. Like the Uyghur people, are somewhere between 6 and 12 million people, which is larger than most countries in Europe. And the Uyghurs, particularly, they've been in the news quite a bit lately because of pretty intense persecution, very similar to what's happened in Tibet, where they've been rounded up, put in concentration camps, gone through re-education. Maybe up to 1 million Uyghurs have been put into these camps. So it's a very serious thing. And the difference between culturally and linguistically between a Han Chinese person and a Uyghur Muslim person, which are Turkic in race and culture. They have their own language, and they just couldn't be any more different culturally. So
Wow.
the Chinese are, obviously, maybe be careful not to be stereotypical, but they're more reserved. Their culture is not as a warm of a culture, warm and cold cultures, more of a cold culture, family oriented, but not as connected to the broader family, so to speak. Whereas, having grown up, I grew up in Wisconsin, but strangely enough, it might be a surprise to you that most of my friends growing up were Mexicans. So I was around Hispanic culture a lot. And,
we everywhere, man. We everywhere.
Yes. And I always thought of when I was working with Uyghur people, how similar they were to Hispanic people. And actually, I've heard that a lot. Like a lot of very effective missionaries to the Muslim world are coming from Hispanic countries because culturally, they're, it's a warm culture, very intense, in their communication, and they're quick to love, quick to fight, and that's just the way the Uyghurs are. And so seeing the differences between the cultures, but then trying to motivate and encourage and mobilize the Chinese church to develop a heart for a people group that they've kind of been at war with for many, many years, and they couldn't be more different culturally. And there's even just national challenges between them, as the Han have a certain vision for what they'd like to see China become, and the Uyghurs feel like they're being pushed off of their lands, and there's a total difference of way they view history. So it was a very interesting time to be there. Certainly things have continued to change since we left. I love both people groups. I want both of them to come to know Jesus Christ. And with the Muslims, though, particularly, they're very sweet, very nice people, easy to become friends with them, very open to talking about spiritual things. But Islam has a strong grip on their hearts. And there's also, I think, because they're under some political persecution, I think in those situations when that happens, people tend to entrench into their norms. And I mean, I remember having conversations with some of my Uyghur friends, and they're saying, like, I understand what you're saying about the gospel. I hear what you're saying about Jesus Christ. It's very compelling. I want to believe it. But to become a Christian means I'd have to betray my people, and I just can't do that right now. And so, that makes another level of challenge in calling people to follow Christ, is that there's a sense of like feeling like I would be betraying my whole people to follow Jesus that way. So it was a wonderful time. I learned a lot. I'm still, I think, using those things. It's part of what drew me to the Bay Area. Lots of Muslims. We have Fremont here is the home with the largest population of Afghans outside of Afghanistan.
Wow.
And so we have an Afghan community of Christians that meet in our church and that we're working with. And so some of the things that I've done and learned with working with Uyghur people carry well over into working with Afghans as well. So, and there's a huge Chinese population, as you saw. There's a whole huge Chinatown.
Yeah,
lots of Chinese people here in the Bay Area. In
yeah.
fact, some of the biggest churches in the Bay Area are Chinese churches.
Chinese,
So,
yeah. That
yeah.
doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing, man.